Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation on our replication project. We chose a 2013 article about the effects of pre-printed versus handwritten Safmeds on fluency. Hi everyone, we all just want to welcome you again to our replication project. We have 3 participants. Chelsea Kading, who lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She is in her 2nd semester at Ball State University, and she works in a clinical center that provides ABA services to individuals on the autism spectrum. Haley Thompson works at Accessibilities, Inc. She is from New Lenox, Illinois, and she is currently in her 3rd semester at Ball State University. And my name is Caitlin Hogue. I am in my 3rd semester at Ball State University. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and I work at a private pediatric practice that provides ABA services, speech services, and OT to pediatrics. Hi, everyone. The purpose of this study is to answer the following question. When utilizing a Safmeds strategy for acquisition, do learners achieve higher rates of fluency using pre-printed cards or handwritten cards? As a group, we hypothesized that the handwritten cards would have a higher acquisition rate. As a group, we decided upon choosing a study that would benefit us all as a whole. Safmeds are a procedure commonly used in the applied behavior analysis setting that allows students to learn numerous definitions in a timely manner using precision teaching. We thought this would be beneficial as we are all pursuing our master's degree, and it will prepare us to study for this class, classes in the future, and also assist us when we sit for the board exam. So for our literature review, the original study created by Fabrisi, Frieder, and Quigley, 2013, The Effects of Pre-Printed versus Handwritten Safmeds on Fluency, mainly focused on if the type of text, i.e. printed cards versus handwritten cards, on a note card, specifically Safmeds, will affect fluency. Safmeds stands for Say All Fast, a minute each day shuffled. Precision teaching, defined by Fabrisi, Frieder, and Quigley 2013, is the accuracy and speed of responding, which was evaluated by creating an operational definition alongside a data collection system for measurement. The study explored interventions of Safmeds with several groups of individuals, such as a 9-year-old with ADHD, using Safmeds that displayed letters of the alphabet, one set hand-printed and another set pre-printed. Another example by Stockwell and Echelem was used on graduate students to increase their fluency in terms related to verbal behavior. For precision teaching, it is very important for learners to respond correctly, but also very important to focus on the actual speed they are responding. The study used various groups and reviewed separate ways Safmeds can be implemented. Though the studies that were mentioned in the article show clear increasing trends for correct and incorrect responses, it was mentioned that there are many weaknesses to the studies and to Safmeds due to the little empirical research related to the topic. As mentioned by Fabrisi, Frieder, and Quigley 2013, the results of this study suggest extraneous variables affecting responding, which may indicate a possible stimulus control issue.
Our study consisted of 3 participants. All participants are graduate students at Ball State University in the Applied Behavioral Analysis program. All of the participants are female, and there are no significant demographic differences across the participants. The dependent variables in the study are the number of correct and incorrect responses per minute. We defined a correct response as correctly naming the term on the back of the card based on the Safmeds definition. For an incorrect response, we defined it as any instance in which the participant incorrectly names the term on the back of the card based on the Safmeds definition. The independent variable for this study is the medium of text on the card, more specifically, pre-written and handwritten Safmeds cards. Although data was taken for correct and incorrect responses, only data for correct responses was graphed. We measured the correct response rate, i.e. fluency, for pre-written and handwritten cards. Fluency rates were determined by the amount of correct responses per minute. The experimental design used in our study was the ABAB design, which we will discuss further in our next slide. The same 25 academic terms were used for baseline and intervention. Sessions occurred 3 times a week on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. During each session, 2 time trials were ran so that steady state responding could be achieved. 2 of the 3 participants began with pre-printed cards, and the 3rd participant began with hand-printed cards. The participants switched to the opposite medium during intervention phases. Switching to the second set ensured that we could indicate a difference in responding if one so happens to occur. Once all participants reached criteria for stable responding and baseline, the participants moved to the intervention phase with the succeeding set of cards. Stable responding was first determined to be met when each individual reached a minimum of 11 correct cards per minute in 2 successive sessions. This was changed when we realized we could not complete the study within the time limit. Following baseline, the same 25 academic terms were used for baseline and intervention.
Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin. So this is my data. As you can see, we chose to implement a multiple baseline design, and also as mentioned previously, 2 of the participants, Haley and myself, began our baseline with pre-printed Safmed cards, and our intervention was then the hand-printed Safmed cards. Chelsea, our other participant, began with hand-printed cards for her baseline and pre-printed for her intervention. In my baseline with the pre-printed Safmed cards, my average rate of fluency was 4.9 cards per minute out of the 25 cards. In intervention with hand-printed Safmeds, my average rate of fluency rose to 8 cards per minute. When returning to baseline with my pre-printed Safmeds, my average rate of fluency grew to 15.3 cards per minute. And with my return to intervention with hand-printed Safmeds, my average rate of fluency was 19.5 cards per minute. My data overall shows a steady increase in trend with little variability. Overall, personally, I did not see a dramatic change in the way I learned these definitions from the 2 types of cards the study had us use. After doing other research and speaking with others who have implemented the Safmed teaching procedure, I learned that handwriting cards can cause you to focus more on the actual manuscript type versus the actual definition memorization. And this is why pre-printed cards, from what I have heard, are a preferred method. For me, I became very self-conscious of the time restraint more than just learning the actual definitions as the phase changes continued. I am not sure if my data is actually representative of a generalized repertoire of these words and their definitions, but there is a nice increase in trend as the phase changes move on. Personally, I talked to the other group members and we discussed before we began that we all thought hand-printed cards, meaning each individual is writing the word and the definition themselves, and we thought that that would have a higher acquisition rate because you personally are writing it. And for me, I'm a visual learner, so I tend to do better when I see it visually. Overall, I am indifferent with both methods, hand printed versus the pre-printed. Thanks.
Hi guys, my name is Haley Thompson and I'm one of the 3 participants in this study. Caitlin and I were the 2 participants who ran baseline with the pre-printed note cards. I began with the pre-printed note cards and averaged 12.8 cards per minute across 4 sessions. And as you can see, I had a steep upward trend during baseline, which is unique because when I met criteria and moved on to the intervention phase, I had a relatively significant decrease in my fluency rates. I believe that this could have been due to waiting for my group members to reach criterion. They all had 5 sessions to meet criteria, and I only had 4 because I met it prior to them. I had to put a hold on my testing, and so I think it's possible that I forgot the specifics to definitions, which could have resulted in that sharp decrease. Although there was that drop in fluency, I was still able to meet criteria at the same pace as my group members moving forward, which was nice. My average rate of fluency for intervention was 11.8, and my intervention was then the handwritten note cards. And then returning to baseline, my fluency increased at the most significant rate compared to all other phases of the study, and my average for this phase was 20.3 cards per minute. So then, returning to intervention for the final phase of our study, I averaged 21.3 cards per minute. And although 21.3 is greater than 20.3 cards per minute by a point, there was only 2 sessions in the final phase, which could be skewing the way the numbers present themselves. So even though that was my highest rate of fluency, there was less sessions to divide by in order to average, and my baseline did have higher scores than my intervention phase on a singular level. Personally, I believed that handwritten cards would have resulted in higher acquisition, but quickly changed my perspective when the study began. I found that it was easier for me to memorize the pre-printed cards because they were just so perfect and minutely written, and rather than actually learning them. I don't think that the way the card is written influenced the success or increase in fluency I experienced during the different phases of that study. So overall, I think it's pretty clear to see that if you look at the graph as a whole, I did have an upward trend with just one significant decrease, but then I was right back up to the same level that I was during baseline. So after baseline, my very last point on 611, that's kind of where my high score was, and then returning to baseline and returning to intervention, it kind of leveled off and stayed at the same. So I would say I was pretty plateaued there, minus that pause in testing that resulted in that significant drop for day 618 during my first intervention phase. So yeah, I can't wait to break down the conclusions for you guys that the rest of my group members came up with. So thanks for listening.
As you can see from the graph, unlike the first 2 participants, I started with hand-printed cards and then used pre-printed cards as my intervention. Starting in baseline, my average rate of fluency was 6.9 cards per minute. In my intervention phase, using the pre-printed cards, my average rate was 10.8 cards per minute, an increase of almost 4 cards since baseline. When I returned to baseline using the hand-printed cards, my average rate of fluency was 16.5 cards per minute, meaning almost a 10-card increase from the original baseline. In the last phase of pre-printed cards, my average rate was 18.3 cards per minute, which is an increase of 7.5 cards from the first intervention phase. I was drawn back when seeing my results, as I had expected to see a much higher increase in the learning of terms. Although there was an overall steady increase in each phase, for me there was a higher rate of acquisition using the handwritten cards as opposed to the pre-printed cards.
I want to start by assessing the topography of the graphs presented by all of the group members for our study. If you look at all the graphs that are presented in the research, the past couple of slides, you'll see that all of us have a pretty steady upward trend, and then we kind of top off and hit a plateau. I just wanted to talk about the trials, 2 criterion per each phase, to show you guys the reliability of the Safmeds procedure that we used. It took, well, let's start with this. The group set our criteria to continue on to baseline, intervention from baseline to 11 correct definitions during baseline, 2 trials in a row. It took 2 out of 3 participants 5 sessions to reach criteria, and 1 out of 3 participants 4 sessions to meet criteria for the study. Understanding the number of sessions needed to meet criteria is beneficial when you're looking at the reliability of the Safmeds procedure. So due to the repetition and how many times we had to run each trial during the session, that showed consistency across participants. Because of all of our baseline levels were so similar, it shows consistency within our procedure. For example, if it took one participant 2 trials to meet criteria and another participant 8 trials to meet criteria, it would be due to probably a confounding variable or a mistake in procedural honesty. Conclusively, our numbers of trial to criteria across phases are 92% similar, so that's a pretty high rate of validity and reliability. The tables on this slide illustrate the consistent increase in fluency across each participant and phase. I was the only participant whose first intervention phase was lower in terms of an average than my baseline phase. This, like I mentioned earlier, could be attributed to several extraneous variables, whether it be lack of focus that day, messy handwriting, or just the effects of the intervention phase. I don't feel that the drop in fluency is attributed to the intervention phase itself. It's most likely attributed to the break in testing while waiting for my group members to meet criteria. Of those 11 correct cards per minute for moving on to intervention phase. Something I really wanted to look at was the between conditions increase in fluency of all the participants for their phases. It's cool because all participants saw their greatest increase in fluency on the return to their baseline phase, which makes me think that they got more cards per minute when they returned to their initial acquisition strategy because it was the initial way that they learned it. It also leads me to believe that it's not how the card is written, whether it be pre-printed or handwritten, that really gives you a change in acquisition phases. So, and those numbers are represented in the table on the right side of this slide. I think that this is a really unique part of our study and an interesting find that I don't think any of us thought we would reach as part of our conclusion. Our group concluded that using the Safmeds procedure does not result in an increase in fluency. However, we agree that we don't think fluency necessarily equals acquisition for Safmeds. We do believe that the Safmed strategy is successful and can result in increased fluency, but it is not a strategy that would be ideal for generalization or testing. Overall, the data shows an upward trend with increasing fluency across all phases. There is one significant outlier in my study that was on date 618 under Haley Thompson's research, which is that one sharp drop in fluency that we talked about in the previous 2 slides. Our group concluded that the style of card, whether pre-printed or handwritten, does not have a significant effect on the fluency achieved by each participant. It is just the Safmed strategy itself and the initial learning style, so our baseline. So like for me and Caitlin, it would be pre-printed, and for Chelsea, it would have been handwritten cards. that it is the style that you initially learn something in that leads to the higher rate of fluency. Therefore, our hypothesis that the handwritten cards would result in greater fluency was rejected by the results of the data. We also hypothesized that handwritten cards would have higher rates of fluency because it is shown in previous studies that if you write something down, you're more likely to remember it. However, that did not reflect itself in our specific study with the Safmed strategy. Like most groups in our course, a significant limitation was the small population. In addition to our small population, we had just 2 participants with the pre-printed cards for baseline and only 1 participant who started with handwritten cards, which leaves our study very narrow and is not at all representative of a population. So our small n of just 3 people is not enough. We also didn't have a third-party outsider that was able to assist us with the handwritten cards, so we had to write them ourselves, which could have influenced the results of our study, and it was a hiccup in our procedural implementation. Furthermore, there was no third-party note card holder either, which could have influenced the rate at which we were able to flip over the cards and get through them during our timed trials. There was a mistake in our group in regards to procedural fidelity. As I mentioned before in the previous slides, I waited for my group members to meet criteria in order for myself to continue on to the intervention phase, and that is not what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to go ahead and continue into intervention phase and repeat our design as necessary instead of waiting. Our group misinterpreted the original study in that sense. There was a few other things that were limitations for our study. There could have been results that were missed out on due to me not continuing onto intervention phases and waiting. And then there was the time constraints. Obviously, we weren't able to use as many definitions as we would have liked to. Like the original study used 60, we only used 25 due to time constraints. Maybe it would be more significant if we had a bigger amount of cards or vocab definitions. It wouldn't have been the same amount of cards seeing the same definitions over and over again. We would have had more things to get through. And the short amount of time doesn't really allow us to understand if we generalize those definitions that we learned, which ultimately leads to there was no test at the end to see if we actually learned things or if we just memorized them and increased our fluency rates. So those are some significant limitations that our study had. I think the most important one is the small population, which we couldn't really control. Yeah, so those are our limitations, and our group discussed future research moving forward for the Safmeds procedures. We think it would be very important to not focus on the style of the card, pre-printed, handwritten, or anything like that, and more so just the procedural implementation of Safmeds. So there are some really great things about Safmeds. You do get to memorize a lot of definitions, but it's kind of just like the world of ABA. We need to generalize those things. Like we can't just focus on one specific SD. We need to do transfer trials. We need to do different teaching strategies. And I do think that it is important for the acquisition, like in terms of getting that primer knowledge. That's what Safmeds would be good for, but generalization needs to be a little bit different. So there's just some really unique interventions and studies that I think can be conducted with Safmeds. So yeah, I hope that future research takes a look at all these things, and hopefully our study has some influence on the world of Safmeds. Thanks for listening, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it.